During the 16 Days of Action 2022 campaign,
Gosa Girls on Fire and Tech Shack Tactical TV interview ordinary but outstanding women.
Hashtag I am every woman.
In our interviews, we honor outstanding businesswomen who have made a difference in their specific sphere of society to ladies who have overcome horrific gender-based violence incidences.
We believe in action, not activism.
Why are women continually cast as helpless victims?
Bystanders to their own fate, presuming that victimhood is a fait accompli. We are not simply deer in the headlights of gender-based violence.
We can and will stand up for ourselves.
We are not second-class citizens who need special days and men standing up for us.
We say no more.
Activism does not change the minds of predators.
Predators will always be predators, waiting in the dark to claim their victims. Standing on street corners with placards saying that we are against gender-based violence has and never alone make a difference. Take action now, not to be a victim, and be a strong woman. Do not put your trust in anybody else except yourself. Take the example from the strong women in these interviews and be a warrior. Hashtag victim no longer.
Vanette Oxley here for Tech Shack Tactical TV and Gosa Girls on Fire for our 16 days of action against no violence for women and children. I'm here with the very lovely Vanessa Govender. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lynette, for including me in such an important discussion.
Thank you. Tell me, who is Vanessa Govender? Can you tell us who you are? It's a difficult question, I know.
Well, I suppose I'm a mum first, but I was one time a journalist. I was with the SABC, and I joined ETV after a 5-year stint at the SABC. I joined ETV in 2005, and I was with them until 2012 when I resigned from mainstream media. I have since written 2 books. One's my memoir and one's a children's book. Essentially, I think there's so many facets to who I am, mother, wife. But one of the most important roles for me, especially in recent years, has been that of a survivor who has been speaking out about gender-based violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and women's rights.
Oh, that's where we actually come in together, because that's feel very strongly about women's rights as well, and the empowerment of women.
I think the revolution has come a long way. 20 years ago, well, more than 20 years ago, I considered myself a fairly educated, enlightened, empowered young woman. And yet I found myself in a situation not unlike that of thousands, and I mean thousands of other women. There was nothing unique about what I was experiencing. But of course, when you're in the midst of such turmoil and such hell, it is all about you, right? You lose sight of the fact that it affects other people. So women's rights, yes, I never thought I would become a voice for that, because for a long time it was easier to hide in the shadows. It was easier to keep up an image because nobody wants to be seen as a victim, and certainly not when you're doing a job that puts you in the public eye.
Yes. What happened? What is your story of abuse? And you found yourself face down in a parking lot in the SABC, and that was sort of where things started changing for you. I'm sure that is not the first incident, but that is what changed you. So please tell us your story.
You're right, Lynette. That certainly was not the first incident, but it certainly was the last incident. I was in a relationship with my partner at the time. We started dating when I started working at the SABC. And we were together for, well, I would say close on to just a little over 5 years, because I'd started my job at ETV. So we were still together for a few months when that particular incident happened. It started off barely a month into our relationship when he punched me with his fist in my chest, and we had an argument. we were barely together for a month. I think I was very taken aback. That had never happened to me before. There was an argument before that, and I obviously felt very responsible because he started crying, and he also started apologizing, and he said, he's never done that before, and he wouldn't blame me if I left him, and then in the next breath said he loved me. And it was the very first time he actually said that in the relationship, and so there were two blows that day. One was a physical blow, and one was the emotional blow of hearing something so profound come out from somebody who just minutes before had used physical violence. I suppose that was the moment to have left and walked away, but I didn't, because I fell for what he had said, and I held myself responsible too. But fast forward to 2005, when that incident happened in the SABC car park. Remember, I had then left the SABC not even like 2 or 3 months before. So I just started my job at ETV, and he didn't want me taking that job. And when I got the call for the offer, he basically said to me, well, if you take it, our relationship is done. Because, he didn't like me being on radio. Looking back, probably that, or maybe he just didn't want me to see me succeed. I don't know what it was, maybe it's a combination of both. But at the time, it feels like, oh gosh, this person's like so into you, they don't want to share you with anybody else. They just want you all for themselves. So he had a huge problem with my voice being on radio. And it was an even bigger problem now that it was going to be my face on TV. And he said to me, well, if you take the job, that's it, we're over. I still took the job. I didn't quite know whether there was any legitimacy to what he was saying. Well, if it was going to be over, because we were constantly breaking up and making it up all the time. It was the cliched abusive relationship, Anyway, he never broke up with me. He picked me up one day. It was my day off from work. We went out. We ended up at the car park of the SABC, where he'd been drinking. We were outside, standing outside of his car in the car park drinking. It was late afternoon. So pretty much a lot of the staff had left. It was quiet. And Lynette, up to this day, I cannot tell you what happened. I cannot tell you what was said. I don't know what he did. All I know was I woke up face down on the tarmac, and he was standing nearby. I could see his shoes, and he bent down, and as I picked myself up, looking at his face, I realized something had happened to me. How I ended up there, what I had said before that, what he'd said before that, what physical violence actually took place for me to have ended up like that, I, hand on my heart, cannot answer that question. But all I know was my injuries were pretty horrific when I did manage to get a look at myself in the mirror of his car. My forehead was swollen, the skin of my nose was ripped off, my chin was badly bruised, and I'd already begun to swell on my forehead. I'm not a medical doctor, but I knew enough to know that I didn't just fall. You know what I mean? There had to have been some sort of force behind those injuries. And he just said I fell. He said I was standing there 1 minute, and the next minute I just fell. And I can't say it was an aha sort of moment or like an epiphany. This is it, it's over and it's done. There wasn't any grand revelation or something like that. It was just, it really was a very quiet sense of like, I really can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm done. So there was nothing grand about that moment.
It just happened.
It was a dramatic moment. It was horrible. I had to look at myself like this in the mirror for weeks on end before it all eventually healed. I had to go out in public looking like this, and I had to keep up the lies, So it wasn't just the physical injuries, but then I had to lie about it. So a lot of my life was a constant lie, and I suppose sometimes, you don't need anything grand or big. You don't need that epiphany. Sometimes it's just reaching a point within you, within your soul, within your heart, within your head, that just says, my girl, I think you're done here. I think you're done. Yeah. So that that for me was the last time he ever struck me.
And you left.
And I left. And I left. And I have to say to you, there was a lot of threats beforehand. If I leave and if I ever consider having a relationship with somebody else, I would be ruining that person's life. And I'd ask him, what do you mean by that? And he'd say like, well, they would regret ever setting eyes on me, so it wasn't just me. I mean, he knew everything. He knew he had access to my family. He knew where I lived. He knew where I worked. And he had, as many abusers do, that charm and that finesse of being able to bring people into your circle, into your thing, where people firstly won't believe that you're capable of such things. And secondly, will generally want to help because they believe that you love this person and you want to get back together with them. So yes, there was a lot of fear initially as to what would happen. But if I am to also be very brutally honest with you, and this is a vulnerability that I share, is that there were moments I actually wondered if I had done the right thing, because I was now suddenly alone. I was with this person who was well-known, a well-established, well-known person. I was always told I was the lucky one in that relationship to have bagged this catch. And I suddenly, I often think to myself, gosh, have you done the right thing? Was it a mistake? Could you not have stuck it out? I mean, really, was it that bad? So there was always those sort of internal conflicts, And I think a wonderful thing about being a journalist, and especially having left that toxic environment where we both worked at, so there was no physically escaping him, you'd have to see him every day. Having left that environment and being in a new environment and being exposed to people who saw you for your worth, and acknowledged what you brought to the table, acknowledged who you were, respected who you were. And I was suddenly seeing myself in a new light, not as his girlfriend, not as some poor sob, who should be grateful that this famous good-looking man has given me attention, or was my, I was his girlfriend or whatever. I saw myself through the eyes of other people. And I think from there, you start to internalize that. And in a way, it's ego boosting, I'm not going to lie. But from that ego boosting, there comes that self-esteem and that confidence, which was all but totally eroded in that relationship. And so it was
literally quite young.
Yeah.
So you were quite young.
I was very young. I mean, gosh, I was fresh out of tech, fresh out of varsity. This was my first job. I was in my early 20s, my first relationship, my first sexual partner, my first intimate partner. So it was a whole lot of firsts for me. And you don't, especially in my community, just get in and out of relationships. Once you're in, you're meant to ride it out, And domestic issues are always seen as, well, it's a husband and wife or a girlfriend and boyfriend affair, and you've got to work it out. And unfortunately, with a lot of women, it takes them coming home in a body bag before the reality of the toxicity and the danger of the relationship that they were in actually settles or sets in with family and friends around them. That's what it takes. And I would argue to this day, it possibly still goes that way, because divorce, breaking up, all those things are seen as shameful things. You're seen as a failure if your relationship hasn't worked out.
I've spoken earlier when I did a previous interview earlier this year to Gerard Labuskaghni, which is a main profiler, and he basically said exactly, you have to get out. You're not going to change that person, and if you continue with the relationship, you are probably going to end up being dead. That's what's going to happen. There's such a small amount of people that actually do get out of that relationship and the person do change. He says 99%, you're not going to change the person and you're going to end up dead if you don't do anything about it.
Yeah, no, look, we know the stats, Lynette. We know what the statistics are. And even those numbers, as horrifically high as they are, they're not even a true reflection of the magnitude of the problem. Because so many people are still living in silence, so many women are still living in shame and fear, because shame and fear are the two two things that crucify you and keep you stuck in this relationship. And it's very easy, and this is what gets me a lot, really gets my goat a lot of the time, is when people say, well, just walk away, just leave, get out, how hard can it be? That's the solution to the problem, right? But actually it's not that easy. There's deep psychological impact, there's trauma, there's fear. You can't
There's financial impact.
I beg your pardon?
I said there's even financial impact. There's all kinds of other stuff that's happening in and around the relationship, the family. It's a very complex situation.
It is. And people simplify it to just leave. Just leave.
Not that easy.
And there are women who have just left. And some of them have ended up having their brains blown out or stabbed or brutally butchered, and their body parts thrown in garbage piles and bins and that sort of thing. So just leaving isn't really also the only option, or isn't really the safest thing to do sometimes.
Absolutely. You said it took you 13 years to break your silence. And did you do that through your book, Beaten But Not Broken?
There were a few people that were privy to what had happened, the extent of which they did not know. But there were people within the SABC and within Lotus FM who were aware of the abuse. Like I said, maybe not the extent to which it was happening. There were one or two people, when confronted, I said, yes, he is abusive, and we'd leave it at that. And there was also a lot of people I denied it to, because, it comes back to this thing of maintaining an image. I did not want to be seen as a victim. That is not who I was, and we work very hard as women. We work hard in whatever fields or careers we are in, and, admitting to something like this, or expressing vulnerability, or showing vulnerability, or sharing something as grotesque as being a victim of this grotesque thing called gender-based violence, you almost feel like, you're going to be judged for it, and not the perpetrator, not your abuser, but you're going to be judged for it. So there's all these things that you carry with you. So yes, I kept my silence. I kept my silence for that reason. I kept my silence because I was in a new job, I was in a new environment, I was mixing with different people, and I literally had an image that I had created for myself. And come hell or high water, I was going to maintain that. Because I didn't want to be seen as a victim. I didn't want people saying to me, oh my goodness, that happened to you, or shame or pity or whatever. I didn't want or need any of that. It was never going to help me, with anything. Keeping silent is not always a peaceful thing. For all those years that I did not talk about it in the detail, with an exception of my husband, who knew intimate details of what transpired in that relationship in terms of the abuse, nobody else actually did, not even my mom or my sisters, whom I consider myself very close to. I would wake up in the early hours of the morning. I couldn't sleep. And, this was an ongoing thing. I would wake up from dreams where I was back at the SABC. I would wake up from dreams of, where I was back together with him. So it was a constant thing. And it was almost,
just underneath the surface.
Yeah. And that was it. It was something inside of me that was screaming or begging to come out. And, in suppressing that truth and keeping that silence wasn't anymore about protecting myself or my image. I was indirectly protecting this man. And I'm sorry, but if that, it's no longer my obligation to protect him. And And thankfully, I had the support of the most important people, which was my husband and my mum and my sisters. And the Indian community is a very conservative one. So talking about these sort of things is like almost taboo. And I'd taken them all into my confidence. And I said, I am going to write. And there's going to be things you're going to read that you are not going to like, that is going to be hurtful. And as long as we all know that, I'm going ahead with this. And I had their support, and I could have asked for nothing more, because nothing and no one else mattered except that they knew. And breaking my silence wasn't so much an act of bravery as much as it was a necessity, because I was carrying trauma. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister. I'm carrying trauma, which made me a very angry human being for a very long time. And none of those people around me deserved the poison of that. And so in breaking silence, I chose to say, I am no longer protecting you, because that's what I've been doing all this while. Not myself, I've been protecting you.
But you still protected his name when the book came out. It was only after that you actually named him. His name is Fahim. And now he's obviously, I have looked through, and he's denying everything, and he's married again, and the lady's also denying it. So yeah, there's ongoing abuse and denial, and I'm pretty sure that if he's abused you, that he's abusing the new wife as well.
You see, the thing about abusers, sexual predators in general, it's almost a cut, copy, paste. You could get a room full of women who have been survivors of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, put us all in a room and get us to talk about our abusers. And at the end of it, we'll all walk out of that room thinking we've been talking about one man, the same man, because they are all so cliched in their demeanor, in everything about them, So yes, I did not name him in my book, because there again, there was still an element of fear, because what would be the consequences? I had not seen this man for a long time. I'm still carrying a lot of trauma. I wrote safely. If I had to rewrite that book now, the facts remain. They're not allegations, they're assertions, they're facts. They will remain. But I think I would not be as diplomatic as I have been in that book. Okay. And I read it now, and I still feel a sense of anger, because I was very diplomatic. And that too came from a sense of fear, because I did not want to anger the beast, Yes, his current wife, not his ex-wife. The ex-wife is the wife that I had contact with, and whom was also bailed out of that relationship because of abuse. The current wife claimed she did not know me, had no connections with their families. She's not lying. I don't know her either. His first wife, yes, I did know. We've exchanged great detail about what abuse we both experienced at his hands. But it's, when I named him and that story came out, he could not respond to me. He got his wife to speak on his behalf. And isn't this what they do? It was so cliched, I almost wanted to laugh. If I wasn't so traumatized, I would have found it hilarious, because you then get a woman to speak on your behalf, and that's a typical coward. So you get a woman coming forward, and I cannot hold it against her. She has not done anything that I did not do for him myself when I was in that relationship. So I could never hold that against her, and I will never hold that against her. But what I'm sure he saw as a very strategic move to get his wife to fight his battle and take on a woman. Of course, she's not going to know what happened in our relationship. She wasn't there, But all of this lent itself to this picture, to reinforce this picture and this image that we have over the years put together of what an abuser is, who he is, what he looks like, how he behaves, how he fights his battles, or how he chooses not to fight his battles and get others to do it for him. And what more strategic thing could you possibly do but then to get a woman to step up for you?
Absolutely.
Clever, but very stupid and very transparent.
Yes. Tell us, so your book Beaten But Not Broken is available on Amazon, am I correct? And some at bookstores?
Yeah, it's available at all exclusive books, bargain books, online as well. It's been in reprint quite a few times. And I have to say, it was almost such a poignant revelation to have people read this and then come back to you and say, I feel empowered. I know what to do. I felt trapped. I couldn't believe that you went through this. And if it could happen to you, then, I feel emboldened now to step up, because we have a sort of idea of what an abused woman looks like. We have an idea of what an abusive man looks like. They're typically of this background, this sort of social standing, and or whatever those misnomers are. We have that image, right? So when you get people who are in the public eye, or you get somebody who's in the public eye who's now been outed and pointed out as an abusive sexual predator, or somebody who stands up and say, well, you know what, it happened to me. It empowers other women to step out of line, because that's what we need to do as women. We have been put in a line. We have been told to toe this line. We have been doing it generation after generation. We are passing it down, mothers to daughters, grandmothers to, we are just passing this thing down. It's almost like it's in our DNA. Keep the silence, keep the peace. Well, it's time to step out of line, and more women are doing it.
That's what I'm saying. Take action. It's not about activism, but action. Do something.
Yes.
Step up.
Absolutely.
From a positive side, what children's book did you write? And what's it about? Yes?
I wrote a book called The Selfish Shongololo. It was actually my first one. My son was about 10 months old, and I was struggling to feed him, and he was like going onto solids. So I was sitting at the window and having to look out, and the birds about. There was a fat little worm on the floor, and so I started making up a story for him, right, based on what we could see out the window. And I toyed around with it, and then I wrote it out, or typed it out, and I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? Let me just send it through. And I sent it through to Penguin, right? Long shot. Let's see, they like it, they don't. What's, nothing to lose, But anyhow, I mean, it was just a few weeks later that they'd sent an email back to say, well, we like it and we'd like to publish. So it's a story about this. It's called The Selfish Shongololo. So it's a story about this very greedy worm that has no friends and basically just wants everything for himself, doesn't like to share and that sort of thing. And then has this moment where he is in dire need of help. And the very animals that he, refused to share with and was unkind to came to his rescue. So it was an epiphany for him, and he changed his wicked way, so to speak.
That's
so
absolutely lovely.
It was a happy ending, yeah. And for me, what's beautiful is that it was told to my child, so it's his story. It belongs to him. But and now it's for other ears as well, and other eyes as well. And
that's fantastic.
What greater gift,
It is.
Greater gift to be able to give somebody a story that impacts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Last thing, what would you say to women out there? What would your message be for the 16 days of action?
I would say 16 days of activism, 16 days of action should be 365 days. As much as I appreciate the sentiment behind these things like Women's Day, Women's Month, 16 days of activism, this is happening every single day. Even once 16 days are over, the body bags are continue to pile up. Women are going to continue being raped. They're not safe in their homes, on the streets, in the workplace, nowhere. But I'm saying we have been taught to keep the peace. It is not your responsibility. Stand up, step out of line, speak out, if not just for yourself, but I'm sure you would be aware of other people. And even if it's the smallest bit of suspicion, act on it. Because for too long, we've heard screams coming from the house down the road, or we've seen the colleague come to work with bruises around her face. We don't ask questions, right? It's easier. Well, ask the questions, get involved, make it your business. 16 days comes and goes, but we are here 365 days. And let me tell you, those body bags will continue to pile up. But people have got to be decisive. And it has got to be men that are at the forefront of this, because men are too quick to say, well, it's not all men. Well, I'm sorry. If you want to distinguish yourself from the rest of that group of men who are sexual predators, rapists, and abusers, you're going to have to step up. Because until then, you guys are not walking around with signs saying, well, I'm a rapist or I'm an abuser. So women will assume it is all men. And if you don't want to be lumped in that category, then it is for men to take up that fight and stand at the front of this war, not for women. It is for men. Just as with issues like, gay and lesbian rights, it's for heterosexual people to stand up for them. It is for issues of racism, the perpetrators or the historical perpetrators of racism to come to the forefront and stand up. That is what it takes. You're being lumped into this category. Until men step up, it is all men. And trust me, I have a son and I have a husband. And I am not afraid to say, until men distinguish themselves from the rest of that, it remains all men. So make your 16 days of activism 365 days. And fear. I'll tell you one thing that my former boss, Deborah Patter, said to me. The best place to hide is in the light. And another powerful quote that came from Dr. Imtiaz Soleiman from The Gift of the Givers. You have put fear into that which you have feared. Let that sink in, because those are two powerful, powerful pieces of advice that were given to me that took a bit of time to settle in and make sense. But let me tell you this. If you're going to turn that tide, you've got to be able to say, nobody makes me afraid. I should not be afraid. Cowards and bullies, they thrive on that.
Absolutely.
Take away that. And what are they left with?
But nothing. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic talking to you. And have a good day. From you, I can see the background is absolutely beautiful there. Enjoy all this. Anyway, cheers.
Thank you very much, Lynette.
I'm a girl on fire, I'm not a victim, a girl on fire, I'll stand my ground, girl on fire, I've made a choice, I stand proud. I'm a girl on fire, I'm a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, I'm every woman. I have taken up arms and I choose to defend all that I hold dear. Independent and strong, you will not keep me down, you can't break me. I'm a girl on fire, I'm not a victim, a girl on fire, I'll stand my ground, girl on fire, I've made a choice, I stand proud. Countless hours on the range, I am responsibly armed, I am your equal. I've empowered myself, I have practiced and trained, fear won't control me. With my sisters in arms, we will make ourselves heard, we'll stand together. I'm a girl on fire, I'm not a victim, a girl on fire, I'll stand my ground, girl on fire, I've made a choice, I stand proud. I'm a girl on fire. We're